Injury, part of the nature of a repetitive sport where repetition and mileage are one of the keys to success, where volume and consistent exposure to the same load makes you faster. Something I personally deal with quite a lot in my rowing. I think, you know, pushing yourself to that limit, finding out where it is, part of pushing yourself to the limit is the limit that your body can cope with something. So naturally, injury can be unavoidable, but there are best ways to go about dealing with it, preventing it, training with it, racing with niggles, stuff like that. But of course, first thing to say is this video is strictly my experience. This is not advice for somebody who is injured. If you're injured, if you've got a problem, if you're unsure about something, go and speak to a qualified professional, physiotherapist, doctor. This is not medical advice. This is not physiotherapy advice. So why, again, I've kind of made these slides with the same format for everybody. I've put why, because people get injured in rowing and you need to learn about it. You need to learn how to deal with it. It's not something that just goes away, unfortunately. Sometimes it does, but most of the time it's not. When it's a problem, it's something you're gonna have to look at. It's something that's always gonna be there. If you do it, you don't go about it right, it'll impact your life after rowing, start causing you pain 24/7. So me, I had a very bad back injury very early on. I basically had to spend 18 months out the boat. Came back from there, there's points at which I just couldn't possibly imagine myself being able to row again. I couldn't walk without pain, without hip pain, without back pain. I had stopped rowing and my back was still getting worse. So I've been there again. I did have the worse injury, but it definitely was a bad one, and enough to motivate me to maybe put out some education out there. But yeah, coming back from that, pushing the volume, that niggle kind of always is there. But gradually, one thing I learned was that you go about it in the right way. I did more and more training. I learned to deal with my injury better. I had more mileage into my back, but my back had gotten better. So if you're in a position where your back is very bad, or your shoulder or your knee or whatever, and I know that feeling of hopelessness that you can get where you just feel like it's never going to improve, then you just have to stick with it. One piece of advice I could give is switch your mind from being somebody who's a rower and you're an injury fixer. You're not looking to produce numbers in the boat or whatever. Your sport is now fixing your back. When I was fixing my back, I would spend, if I literally, no joke, if I was not moving, I'd be stretching. So if I was cooking dinner and I was stood still, I'd have my foot up and I would stretch my glutes. My glutes were really tight. If I was sitting in a lecture, I'd be stretching. If I was watching TV, I'd be stretching. So ask yourself, what is there that you can possibly do? If you're sitting still, if you're at a desk, you probably have to put up with some weird looks, but you can improve your injury. So probably what I'll touch on is kind of obviously the main one for rowers is backs. Then we have shoulders is probably the next one, and then knees. Carpal tunnel is kind of a more common one as well as some rib stress fractures. Those are more either purely just rest or surgery routes, so there's not much that I can comment on there in terms of that. Again, if you get any of these, go and speak to a physiotherapist, get some advice from there. How to prevent it? It's very hard to prevent an injury when you have not experienced the pain of having to spend time away from your boat. Training might have been going well, and then oh no! Oh, it is recording. Training might have been going well, you might have been progressing, and then boom, you've got a back injury. You have to sit on the bank for 4 weeks and you see all of your teammates progress, get faster, and you're just sitting there, how am I ever going to catch up? Well, the first thing I'd say is trust the process and know that you go about it in the right way. You'll be back there in no time. And that's, again, something that we can also touch on as well as cross training. How to not miss a beat. So the reason I say that is because you need to be motivated to do injury prevention work before you've experienced the pain, which is often something that's very motivating for somebody to do injury work, because there's not much reward to it. It doesn't make you a faster rower. You don't feel the benefit from it. You just, when you do it right, nobody sees it. I'm trying to think of an analogy, but like, what are those professions where it's like, if somebody does their job right, then you never hear from them? It's the same with injury prevention. So being forced to push through. If you're a coach, again, I've dealt with plenty of athletes where I'm mentoring them, I'm supporting them, and their coach, for whatever reason, is saying that they have to do it, they have to push through. They're putting the well-being of the athlete second to boat speed, which I think is ridiculous. Anyways, you find yourself in a position where you're going to have to push through. If your coach has been, you don't have to, you can quit your sport. That's what I would say is, put your health first. But if you happen to be in a situation where you're being forced to do something, in the same way I was forced to do trials with glandular fever. Okay, in the run up to when you're going to be doing your piece or your race or whatever you're being forced to do, you want to be doing as much mobility work, as much activation work, supporting your hips, your shoulders, whatever that area is. You want to be targeting that until the moment that you get there. One other good thing as well to do is to improve recovery around that if you're having to deal with these sort of things. A hot water bottle. I used to do it for my back when I was trying to build back. Hot water bottle, wrap a piece of cloth or something like that and tie it and have it sitting on your back. That's another good way to kind of keep your back warm, so you can put your back in the best position going into training, going into whatever you're trying to do. Okay, one of the hardest parts about injury is when you get the injury. Dealing with the emotion of that, the frustration, the disappointment, that's one of the most frustrating points. I think the second most risky part is when you start to progress and when your back goes. I'm gonna keep using the back as the example. Say, and it could be anything. Your back goes from being sore 80% of the time to being 40% of the time. And then you think, okay, I've been able to row once a week. I've seen a bit of progression. Now I can do twice a week. Okay, now it keeps progressing, You get carried away with it. You need to be on the much lower side of building back to it than pushing past it. Just know that consistently adding on 10%, again, roughly what I would say in terms of increasing load for injuries, 10% a week, no more. The most exciting part of coming back from an injury is maybe you build back on the erg, you've done 2 minutes, 5 minutes, 10, 20, 30. You can get in the boat, you can feel the boat running again, you get a bit of pressure, you feel the boat moving, you get excited, you get carried away. Before you know it, you're back to square one because you've jumped back way too quickly. I know it, I've done it plenty of times. The other part about building back is as you feel your back start to get better, you think you don't need to do those exercises or those things that helped you get there. Those exercises, those routines will have to be with you for the rest of your rowing career if you want to avoid it again. And sometimes you get one injury, you learn the exercises to get better, you do the exercise for the rest of your career. Chances are you get one injury, you do the exercises, you get better, you stop doing the exercises, 6 months, 12 months, you get injured again. You rinse, repeat like that, and maybe it takes you 3 or 4 times to get that. What I'm going to suggest, I'm telling you from my experience, that's what I did, but how disciplined can you be to do these exercises when you're not getting the reward for them? Again, this discipline, this mind, so much of it is a mindset as well. How focused can you be in preventing and training? Ultimately, what I always say, the most important thing for success is training consistently. How can we train consistently? Avoid injury. How can you avoid injury? Being consistent with your prehab and your rehab, even when you're not dealing with an injury and you're prehabbing it, you're preemptively planning for it. Cross training. Now, if you can do this well, you can come back and miss very, very little beats in terms of fitness. I've done it before with plenty of my athletes where you build the right training program, built on the bike ideally if you can. If you've got a knee injury, if you've got a knee injury, ski erg, I'm not going to lie, it's not ideal. But cycling and running are great cross-training tools. If you do enough mileage on the bike in the right intensity and you hit the bike volume right and you still are able to produce high volume on the bike, your heart, your lungs, your mitochondria, strength in your legs will stay there. What will suffer is some of your core and hip strength, but generally that comes back in around 2 to 3 weeks if you've properly trained on the bike. So if you can, look, when I was injured, I'll pull up a session on the screen here. This was one of my shoulder injuries, I was spending 3 hours a day on the bike. It sucked, but it made a difference, and it meant when I came back, I missed very little beats. So push the volume as hard as you possibly can on the bike while not compromising form. Hit the high intensity on the bike as well. Pretty simple. You can pick your bike sessions in the same way you would with your rowing, where if you have 8x500s, you can do 8x2 minutes on the bike. Volume on the bike, if you want to equate it, you're going to have to do a good bit more than you would on the erg. Okay, so kind of talk about some general technical tips for injury prevention. So using your glutes is a great way to prevent knee pain. If you have knee pain, it's often overusing your quads and underutilizing your glutes. So if you use your glutes when you row, you're going to support your knees more and you're likely to prevent injury in your knees. If you want to support your back, use your glutes more. That supports your spine more. It takes the load off your vertebrae and moves it into your hips. Another thing to look out for, a common point for injury, is say this is your spine and this is you compressed. If when you push your legs on the leg drive and your back bends as you push your legs, that's a really common area to get injured in. So whatever strong position you can get your back into, if you can hold it and then drive your legs, that's a much better way to prevent back injury. For shoulders, when you're rowing, you don't want to let your shoulders go up or let your shoulders go out. There's a technical aspect of it as well where it's going to affect your catch, but you want your shoulders to be down and back when you're reached out of the catch. That's a good way to support your shoulders. Again, this kind of ties in with some of the strength work that we talked about as well in the previous Row Faster series episode. Activation, stretching, foam rolling. There is zero evidence that shows that foam rolling prevents injuries in sports. Zero. I'll try and find that clip of Big Short when Mark Baum's like, zero, there's a zero chance.
Sir. Zero. Zero. There is a 0% chance
that foam rollers prevent injuries.
Zero. Excuse me.
What it does do, it overstimulates your nerves so that when you take away that pain, that it feels better. So what it can do, again, there's not proof behind this, but it loosens up the area. It can make moving through a range easier, but there's no evidence to suggest that foam rolling prevents injury. Think about when it's winter and you're wearing a t-shirt and you go outside. You get cold at first, but then you get used to it, and then you come back inside and you've not changed the temperature, but it feels warmer. It's the same exact thing. That's a nerve sensation you're doing when you're changing rooms there. Your nerves just adapt. It's the same when you're foam rolling. You expose your nerves to lots of sensation. You take that exposure away, your nerves are going to be desensitized. Stretching, this is a great way to improve mobility, obviously. Figure out, like, for me, in terms of stretching, it's mainly focused at hips. So glutes, hip flexors, hamstrings, adductors. They're the four big ones that you're going to want to stretch in order to make sure that you're freeing up your hips to move through the range correctly. The number one thing you can do to prevent injury is activation exercises that target the weak, small areas of your muscles that don't get used when you go to train. So if you hop in the boat, you don't do any warm up, your glutes, your quads, your big upper body muscles, they're gonna work. But if you've not warmed up your smaller muscles like your rotator cuffs, your adductors, your abductors, your hip flexors, your core muscles, if you've not switched those on with pre-activation exercises, then you're gonna be exposing yourself to a very high chance of injury. So look, coping with it, plenty of people, the reality is if you're going to want to row, you're probably going to have to deal with some sort of injury. That's not what I suggest, but I totally understand that some people value being able to row more than they do living pain-free in one way or another. It's not what I advise, but having done it myself, it's something I can understand. So how do you go about dealing with it if you've chosen to do that yourself? Okay, you have to become very sensitive to it. And again, one thing I really suggest people do with injuries is start taking journals. Now again, it's a pain in the ass, but it made a massive difference for me. One point in my dark days with my back injury, I was really struggling to see progression in my back. What I did, start taking notes of like how my back was that day. I would write things like, back was sore all day. It was very sore when I carried in the groceries. Just do that daily. And then eventually what I started doing, the first time I looked back 2 weeks, I noticed that there was a massive difference from where I was that day and the day before. I was like, geez, 2 weeks ago I was constantly in pain, or I would be, when I would go walk to the shops, my back would be sore. Now it's just, when I'm sitting or something that my back's sore. Now again, it's still not better, but being able to see that progress is a massive part of it. It also really helps with being able to identify with what's causing you problems. So for me, again, it was stupid that I didn't realize it, but it turns out it was weights training and that was impacting my back. And I started to notice patterns. You can do that and you're coping with your training. You start to notice patterns in what is causing your back or your injury to be sore and to trigger it. You notice these patterns, you can obviously avoid them in the future. You need to figure out yourself where that point is of what discomfort you're going to cope with. How you're going to manage that is ultimately up to you, and it's something that I can't give advice on, I'm afraid. So thank you. I hope that was helpful, and you're welcome, because again, this advice is good. Wishing you all the best. Again, if you're watching this and you're not injured, great. Prevent it by doing the details that I gave in that video there. If you're injured, I'm sorry to hear it. It sucks. I know, I've been there, but there is light at the end of the tunnel. Switch your mindset from being a rower to being an injury fixer. Trust the process, journal, figure out the patterns, figure out where the root of the problem is, and move forward. But yeah, if you like this stuff, I don't know, I can always do another injury video. There's stuff you want to touch on more. Please do let me know what you would like to hear more of. Like, comment, subscribe, all the usual. Bye.